deep within my heart, I know you've won. I know you've overcome. And even in the dark, when I'm undone, still believing. I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles take time. While I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. While I wait, I will trust you. Lord, I'll trust you all the same. When I fall apart, you are my strength. Help me not forget, seeing every scar. You made me whole. You're my healer. I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles take time. I live by faith and not by sight. Sometimes miracles take time. While I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. While I wait, I will trust you. Lord, I trust you all the same. You're faithful every day. Your promises remain. You're faithful every day. Your promises remain. You're faithful every day. Your promises remain. You're faithful every day. Yeah, yeah. Your promises remain. Though I don't understand it, I will worship with my pain. You are God, you are worthy, you are with me all the way. While I wait, I will worship. Lord, I worship your name. Though I don't have all the answers, still I trust you all the same.
Well, good morning, Broken Arrow First United Methodist Church, church family, friends, strangers out there in the digital world. Excited to be with you this morning as we share our last Holy Week devotional as we close out our Holy Week and prepare for Resurrection Sunday. And I just want to tell you all how much I love you and miss you, and can't wait to be with you and worshiping with you. And instead of meeting you on the social world, meeting you face to face and giving you a hug. I'm going to need lots of hugs and lots of handshakes and lots of good games at the end of all this quarantine. But today I'm going to share with you a devotional as we celebrate Good Friday today. Now there may be some tears that are shed, maybe not necessarily from you, but probably from this guy right here, yours truly, right? Real tears. And so I want to begin this devotional this morning asking the question, how many of you have had to watch somebody suffer? How many of you had to watch somebody suffer? And that could be anything from watching somebody suffer through end-of-life care. That could be somebody battling through cancer. That could be somebody suffering through some traumatic injury. It could be something small. It could be something that somebody caused for themselves, some decision that they made, and now they're suffering certain repercussions because of their actions. And I want you to think about a situation that you witnessed that. Could be a family member, could be a friend, could be somebody you worked with, could be one of your children, could be your spouse. But I want you to think about those situations. And when you think about them, how many of us wished we could have done something about it? How many of us wished we could take the pain away, wished we could fix it, wished we could solve the problem, wished we could have done something? I know I do. And as I begin sharing with you about this, I'm reminded of a time when we welcomed our first child into this world, Micah. As many of you know, my wife and I have 2 children. We have a 4-year-old Micah, and we have an 8-month-old Levi. Here's a picture of them. Well, when Micah was born with what's well known as jaundice. And he was having a hard time eating. He wouldn't eat. And his blood levels were not very good at all. And so after one night's stay at the hospital, the doctors thought, well, we'll let them go home and we'll just keep checking. And so my wife and I brought Micah to the doctor's office, just a 1-day-old, and just to have his levels checked to make sure that he was doing okay, to see if he was gaining any weight. And so the doctor came in, looked at him, and said, well, we're going to have to take some blood to test his levels to see how he's doing, and to see what his bilirubin levels are, to see what the jaundice looks like for him. And so he left the room, and a nice, sweet, older lady came into the room to take his blood. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen and how they were going to do it. And so my wife's holding Micah at the time, and she says, well, I'm gonna have to poke his foot. And so she shows us this little needle, and then she says, I've got to fill a couple of vials up with blood so that we can run this test to check on him. And so she pokes his foot, and Micah let out this awful scream and cry, and he just wailed as she squeezed his foot. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just bawling my eyes out. I'm just weeping profusely because I can't do anything about it. And my poor wife, she's sitting there like trying to console her 1-day-old baby, and her husband's over here bawling his eyes out. And I'm just watching my son scream from the top of his lungs. He can't do anything but just scream because he's hurting. And all it was a little prick on his heel and a little blood draw for him to be better. And in that moment, I just wanted to take the pain away from him. I just wanted him to not have to go through what he was going through with his jaundice, with his blood levels, with his eating problems. I just wanted to solve it all. I wanted to take it all away. The second thing that I realized was how much more I understood God's love in that moment. As I watched my son scream just from a little foot prick, I couldn't imagine how much love God had for his son Jesus, and how much agony and how much his heart broke as he watched his son whipped and beaten and spit upon, as he watched his son carry his cross to which he knew he would be crucified. How much his heart broke as they drove the nails into his hands and into his feet. Now I know my son's foot prick doesn't compare to the crucifixion of Christ. I recognize that and I understand that. But as a father witnessing his 1-day-old giving blood, I can't even fathom, I can't even imagine how much God's heart broke when Jesus was crucified. And that's what we celebrate today. We celebrate the crucifixion of Christ. It's not pretty. It's not glamorous. And if you read through the Gospels, you'll see it's scary, it's hurtful, it's emotional. And it will tear at your heart as you reflect on your own personal journey with family, with friends that you've watched suffer and hurt. You see, it's easy for us to ask the question, why would a loving God do such a thing? Why would a loving God send his son Jesus Christ to the cross to die? Why wouldn't Jesus just, why wasn't there some other way? Why didn't he save him? Well, fast forward 4 years. You know, the last couple of weeks we've been kind of sharing more about Easter with Micah as he's learned more now that he's a 4-year-old and is able to understand things a little bit better. And was sharing with him the story of the crucifixion of Jesus with him. As we're reading through this story, you could see his whole demeanor change as he watched Jesus on the cross. And he said, "Daddy, that's sad. Why did they do that to him?" I said, "Son, it's not the end of the story." He said, "Dad, but why couldn't he just come off? Why couldn't he just come down from the cross?" At this point, I'm in tears, talking to my 4-year-old about Jesus and the cross. I said, "Micah," I said, "he did it to save us. He did it to save you and me. He did it so we could spend our lives with God in heaven one day. It says, but this isn't the end. He just had to go through this pain, this suffering, to show the world that he could overcome sin and death. And that's what we prepare our hearts for on this Good Friday. You see, the passage that I'm going to read to you this morning is not an account of the crucifixion. Most of you know that story. If you don't, get into the Gospels and read it. Relive it. But the passage I want to read with you this morning comes from John chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. You may be a bit familiar with it, right? It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever might believe in him will not perish, but have eternal life." You see, God loved not just Jesus, but he loved his whole creation. And he was willing to endure and to witness the suffering of his own Son, that he might save me and you and your family and your friends and your co-workers, that we might spend eternity with him. But it doesn't end there. You see, verse 17 says, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it, but to save the world." Not to condemn it, but to save it. So in this day and age, during this pandemic season of our lives, the question is, well, why isn't God healing? Why isn't God taking this away? Why would God let this happen? This is a wrong question to ask. This isn't God's fault. God said to his Son Jesus, not to condemn, but to love and to save. And so if you know somebody questioning during this crazy season in our world, help them to know the love of Jesus, the selfless, sacrificial life, that he didn't count his life as something to be held on to, his divinity in heaven. Paul writes in Philippians 2, but he took on the earthly form of a human being, the humility and the humbleness. He took on the cross for us. And that's what we celebrate today on this Good Friday. So may God rest in your hearts and your minds. And as you walk through this day and reflect on Christ's sacrifice, may God continue to renew that spirit in you of faith, of hope, of love for tomorrow and for Resurrection Sunday. Because it's not the end of the story. Today is not the end. People will meet Jesus. People will know him. Love you all. Have a great day. Bye.